My name is Emma, and as I sat in the freezing cold, wood-paneled courtroom of the Suffolk County Family Court, I watched my soon-to-be ex-husband, Julian, adjust the cuffs of his $5,000 Tom Ford suit. He had this sickening, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. You know the look, that smug, entitled expression of a narcissist who thinks he's already won the game before the whistle even blows. He was leaning over, whispering something to his hotshot, shark-like attorney, and they both let out a quiet, condescending chuckle. Julian was practically vibrating with excitement to sign those divorce papers. In his twisted mind, he was about to throw me out onto the streets of Boston with absolutely nothing. He was banking on the ironclad, bulletproof prenuptial agreement his family had forced me to sign 5 years ago. To him, I was just a naive, broke girl he was finally discarding. But what Julian didn't know, what his expensive lawyer didn't know, and what had kept me sleeping like a baby for the past 6 months was that the judge was about to read my actual financial disclosure out loud to the entire room. Julian thought I was a penniless accountant. He had no idea that I was the sole owner of a financial consulting firm with a net worth of $5.2 million. And the best part? That exact same prenup he used to trap me and protect his generational wealth was about to be the exact legal shield that protected 100% of my secret empire from his greedy little hands. If you've ever dealt with a toxic partner, a narcissist who tried to gaslight you into thinking you were worthless, or in-laws who treated you like trash, hit that like and subscribe button right now. Because the absolute meltdown Julian had in that courtroom when reality hit him like a freight train, it is a story of revenge you do not want to miss. But to truly understand the sheer perfection of this karma, I have to take you back to before the courtroom, before the secret millions, and before the ultimate betrayal. I have to take you back to the beginning, to the illusion of a perfect life that almost destroyed me. I didn't come from money, not even close. I grew up in a tiny, cramped apartment in South Boston. My dad was a mechanic, my mom was a diner waitress, and I was the first person in my family to even set foot on a college campus. I hustled my way through school, drowning in student loans, working double shifts just to afford textbooks. By the time I was 24, I had landed a decent entry-level job as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. I was proud of my life. It was simple, but I built it myself. Then I met Julian. We crossed paths at a charity gala I was dragged to by a coworker. I was wearing a cheap, off-the-rack dress I'd bought on clearance, sipping cheap wine in the corner, feeling totally out of place. And then he walked over. Julian was 30, devastatingly handsome, and carried himself with that effortless confidence that only comes from being a Beacon Hill Trust Fund baby. His family came from old money, the kind of wealth where they have buildings named after them and holiday homes in the Hamptons. From the second he introduced himself, the love bombing began. It was intense, dizzying, and completely intoxicating. I had never been treated like that in my entire life. He took me to restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He surprised me with weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. He sent massive bouquets of peonies to my cramped cubicle just because it was a Tuesday. He made me feel like I was the center of his universe, like a modern-day Cinderella. But looking back, the red flags were always there, waving frantically in the wind. I was just too blinded by the fairy tale to see them. The first crack in the facade appeared about 6 months into our relationship when he introduced me to his mother, Victoria. Victoria was the reigning queen of the local country club, a woman whose entire personality revolved around zip codes, designer labels, and HOA board meetings. When Julian brought me to their massive gated estate for Sunday brunch, Victoria looked me up and down like I was something she had scraped off the bottom of her Louboutins. An accountant? She had sneered, taking a delicate sip of her mimosa. How quaint. I suppose someone has to do the tedious little math for the real business owners. Do your parents still live in that rough neighborhood? I read about a mugging there just last week. How stressful for you. Julian didn't say a word to defend me. He just awkwardly patted my knee under the table. Like when I brought it up later, feeling humiliated, he deployed his favorite weapon, gaslighting. Emma, you're being overly sensitive, he sighed, looking at me with this mix of pity and annoyance. My mother is just traditional. She has high standards. You have to understand that entering our world comes with certain expectations. Stop playing the victim and just try to fit in. That was the beginning of the erosion of my self-esteem. Slowly, methodically, Julian began to chip away at who I was. He subtly criticized my clothes, calling my outfits a little too working class for his circles, so he bought me a whole new wardrobe. He complained about my friends, calling them loud and unrefined, until I slowly stopped hanging out with them just to avoid a fight. He convinced me that my boundaries were unreasonable and that I should just be grateful to be a part of his glamorous life. Then came the proposal, a lavish affair in Paris that looked perfect on Instagram but felt strangely hollow in reality. And exactly 1 week before the wedding, the final trap was sprung. Julian invited me to his family's corporate law office. We sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room, surrounded by 3 older men in expensive suits. That's when Victoria slid a thick stack of papers across the polished mahogany table. "It's just standard procedure, Emma," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "A prenuptial agreement to protect the family assets. Nothing personal, darling." I looked at Julian, my heart sinking. "You want me to sign a prenup? You don't trust me?" Julian gave me that same pitying look. "Emma, don't make this a drama. I'm a partner at my law firm now. I have a trust fund. It's just business. Paragraph 15 clearly states, what's mine before and during the marriage remains mine, and what's yours remains yours. If we divorce, you get no alimony, no claim to my properties, and no share of my investments. We walk away with exactly what we earned ourselves." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a manipulative whisper. "If you really love me, and not my money, you'll sign it. Prove my mother wrong, Emma." I was cornered. I was young, deeply in love, and terrified of losing the man I thought was my soulmate. I didn't lawyer up. I didn't get my own counsel. Like an absolute idiot, I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen and signed my name on the dotted line. They all smiled, a cold, victorious smile. They thought they had successfully boxed me in. They thought they had secured a compliant, dependent little wife who would never dare step out of line because she'd be terrified of ending up broke. And for the first 3 years of our marriage, they were right. I lived in a gilded cage. I was Mrs. Julian Sterling, a trophy wife who was expected to look pretty at charity galas, or tolerate Victoria's endless insults, and turn a blind eye to Julian's increasingly late nights at the office. I was completely financially dependent on him because right after the wedding, he convinced me to quit my embarrassing little accounting job to focus on running his household. I had no income, I had no power, I had no voice. Until the night everything shattered, the night I realized the fairy tale was actually a nightmare, and the prince was just a monster in a custom-tailored suit. That was the night the old, naive Emma died, and the new Emma, the one who would quietly burn his entire life to the ground, was born. If you've never been in a relationship with a covert narcissist, let me explain how the trap works. It doesn't snapshot all at once. It closes inch by inch, so slowly and so quietly that by the time you realize you can't move, you've already forgotten what freedom feels like. For the first 3 years of our marriage, I lived in a $4 million, 6-bedroom colonial mansion in the most exclusive suburb of Boston. To the outside world, I had won the lottery. I was Mrs. Julian Sterling. I drove a pristine white Range Rover, carried Birkin bags I didn't even like, and spent my Tuesdays at charity luncheons sipping sparkling water with women who had more plastic in their faces than a Tupperware factory. But inside those perfectly painted soundproof walls, I was suffocating. It was a gilded cage, and Julian was the warden. Once I quit my accounting job at his loving suggestion, the financial abuse began. It was disguised as care at first. "Let me handle the stress of the bills, babe," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "You just focus on making our house a home." But within months, my name was removed from all the joint accounts. My personal credit cards were paid off and mysteriously canceled. Instead, I was given a single, low-limit debit card. Julian called it my allowance. I was a 26-year-old grown woman, a former accountant, and I had to ask my husband for permission to buy a $6 latte or a new bottle of foundation. But whenever I brought it up, he would hit me with world-class gaslighting. "Emma, why are you being so ungrateful?" He would sigh, looking at me like I was a disappointed toddler. "I give you a beautiful life. You literally don't have to lift a finger, and you're complaining about budgeting? My God, you really do have a poverty mindset, don't you?" He used my working-class background as a weapon to constantly keep me off balance. And if Julian was the warden, his mother, Victoria, was the executioner. Victoria had a key to our house, and she used it like a weapon of mass destruction. She would drop by unannounced at least 3 times a week, running her literal white-gloved fingers over my fireplace mantel to check for dust. She never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was a peasant who had infiltrated her royal bloodline. I remember one specific dinner party we hosted for Julian's law firm partners. I had spent 2 entire days cooking a massive, nang complex French menu from scratch because Julian said catering was too impersonal. When dinner was served, Victoria took one bite of the coq au vin, dramatically pushed her plate away, and sighed loud enough for the whole table to hear. You know, Emma, she smiled, her eyes completely dead. It's so charming how hard you try. Julian's last girlfriend, Eleanor, the senator's daughter, you remember her, darling. She just had this natural elegance. But I suppose we can't expect a Michelin star experience from a diner waitress's daughter. You did your best with what you know. The table went dead silent. I felt my face burn with a humiliation so hot I thought I might pass out. I looked across the table at Julian, desperately pleading with my eyes for him to defend me, to say anything. Julian just chuckled, took a sip of his Cabernet, and said, Mom, be nice. Emma's learning. It builds character. That was my life. Like walking on eggshells 24/7, completely isolated from my old friends, and estranged from my parents because Julian convinced me they were toxic and only wanted his money. I was a perfectly manicured ghost haunting my own life. But every victim has a breaking point. A moment where the pain of staying exactly the same finally outweighs the terror of changing. For me, that moment arrived on a freezing, snowy Christmas Eve during our 3rd year of marriage. The Sterlings always hosted a massive, pretentious Christmas gala at their family estate. The house was crawling with politicians, judges, and CEOs. I was wearing a suffocating floor-length velvet gown Victoria had picked out for me, feeling completely dead inside as I smiled and nodded at old men talking about their golf handicaps. For months, I had been trying to talk to Julian about starting a family. I was 27, incredibly lonely, and I foolishly thought a baby might bridge the massive gap growing between us. I thought it might soften him. So, seeing him in a seemingly good mood, laughing with his colleagues, I pulled him away from the crowd and into his father's private, mahogany-paneled study. I shut the heavy oak doors, blocking out the sound of the string quartet playing in the ballroom. Julian, I said softly, taking his hand. I was thinking, maybe in the new year we could finally start trying. For a baby. I really want to build a real family with you. The smile instantly vanished from his face. He pulled his hand away as if my touch physically repulsed him. He walked over to the antique bar, poured himself a glass of scotch, and turned to look at me. The look in his eyes wasn't just cold, it was absolute, unfiltered disgust. The mask had completely slipped. A baby? He scoffed, letting out a harsh, mocking laugh. Emma, let's be realistic for a second. You can barely manage the housekeeper without having a nervous breakdown. What exactly would you contribute to raising a Sterling? I blinked, the words feeling like a physical slap across the face. What do you mean? I'd be its mother. I'd love it. Love? He interrupted, rolling his eyes. Love doesn't pay for private schools. Love doesn't build a legacy. Look at you. You have no ambition. You have no career. You have no pedigree. You bring absolutely zero value to this marriage other than looking decent in photos. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes scanning me up and down like I was a piece of defective machinery. You're a dependent, Emma. You're a financial black hole. Did you really think I was going to mix my bloodline with someone who has nothing to her name? Someone whose greatest achievement is marrying me? No. We are not having kids. Ever. You're lucky I even keep you around. Now fix your makeup. You look pathetic. And get back out there. He set his glass down, walked past me, and opened the door, disappearing back into the glittering party. I stood alone in that dimly lit study for a long, long time. I heard the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt the cold draft from the window. And you know what? I didn't cry. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't shed a single tear. It was as if a switch had been violently flipped in my brain. The fog of his endless gaslighting just evaporated. The spell was broken. In that cruel, devastating moment, Julian had handed me the greatest gift he could have ever given me, the ugly, unvarnished truth. He didn't love me. He didn't even respect me. I was just an accessory, a placeholder. And because of that ironclad prenup I had signed, he believed he held all the cards. He believed I was trapped, utterly dependent on his scraps, and entirely powerless to fight back. You bring absolutely zero value to this marriage. His words echoed in my head. You have no ambition. You have nothing to your name. I looked at my reflection in the polished wood of his father's desk. The timid, terrified, dependent girl was gone. In her place was an accountant who had just realized she had been crunching the wrong numbers for 3 years. Julian Sterling thought I was a helpless little bird trapped in his cage. He didn't realize that under all that velvet and diamond jewelry, I was still the same gritty South Boston girl who had hustled her way through life. He told me I had no value, no money, and no power. So I decided right then and there I was going to build an empire, and I was going to do it right under his arrogant, aristocratic nose. The morning after that Christmas Eve, I woke up before Julian. I watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling beneath the $1,000 silk sheets. Usually, I would look at him and feel a desperate, pathetic ache for his approval. But that morning, I felt absolutely nothing. The spell was completely broken. He had told me I brought zero value to our marriage. He had told me I was a financial black hole. And the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman who has nothing left to lose is to tell her exactly how the game is played. Because Julian was right about one thing, the prenup. Paragraph 15. What's yours remains yours. He had forced me to sign it to protect his generational wealth, blissfully ignorant that he had just handed me the exact legal loophole I needed to build my own. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't scream or throw plates. If I left then, I would be exactly what he said I was, a penniless girl out on the street. Instead, I decided to play the long game. I implemented what psychologists call the gray rock method. I became as boring, unreactive, and emotionally blank as a gray rock. When Julian insulted me, I just smiled pleasantly and nodded. When Victoria dropped by to criticize my housekeeping, I offered her tea and agreed with her. I gave them absolutely nothing to feed their toxic egos. I let them think they had completely broken my spirit. But in reality, I was moving in silence. The very next day, the moment Julian's Porsche pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I took $500 I had secretly hoarded from grocery change over the years, took an Uber to a town 3 zip codes away, and opened a P.O. box. I bought a cheap refurbished laptop with cash and a burner phone. Then I walked into a small, local credit union, miles away from Julian's elite banking circles, and opened a checking account solely in my name, using the P.O. box as my mailing address. No paper trail, no digital footprint. Total stealth mode. Next, I needed a workspace. Our mansion had a massive detached guest house over the garage that nobody ever used. Julian used the lower level to store his vintage wine collection, but the upstairs was basically an abandoned loft. I dragged an old folding table and a chair up there, hooked up a portable Wi-Fi hotspot, and set up my command center. For the first few weeks, I cold emailed hundreds of small businesses, offering freelance bookkeeping and financial consulting. It was grueling, but I had a massive advantage. I was hungry and I was actually brilliant at what I did. My first big break came 2 months later. A woman named Elena owned a rapidly growing boutique tech startup in Cambridge. She was a genius coder, but an absolute disaster with numbers. Her company was bleeding money, and she was weeks away from bankruptcy. I took her on pro bono for the first month just to prove my worth. I completely restructured her cash flow, negotiated better vendor contracts, and found a massive tax loophole her previous, overpriced CPA had completely missed. Within 90 days, I had pulled her company out of the red. Elena was so blown away that she not only put me on a massive monthly retainer, but she also started recommending me to every other female founder in her inner circle. And just like that, the floodgates opened. My niche became incredibly clear. I was the financial fixer for female-led businesses. I understood their struggles, I didn't talk down to them like the old boys club on Wall Street did, and I delivered brutal, undeniable results. The irony of my double life was almost intoxicating. By day, while Julian was at his law firm feeling incredibly important, I was in that dusty guest house loft, wearing sweatpants, aggressively scaling a business. I incorporated my consulting firm as an LLC in Delaware to ensure total anonymity. I hired a virtual assistant to handle the administrative overflow. I started investing my profits heavily into low-index funds and a few high-yield commercial real estate syndicates. I was working 14-hour days, fueled by pure, unadulterated spite and a desperate craving for freedom. But the moment the clock struck 5:30 p.m., the laptop slammed shut. I would sprint back to the main house, change into a pristine cashmere sweater, fix my makeup, and have dinner waiting on the table. Julian would come home, toss his briefcase on the couch, and look at me with that familiar, condescending smirk. "God, I'm exhausted," he would sigh, pouring a scotch. "Negotiated a massive merger today. What did you do, Emma? Go to Pilates? Watch Netflix? Must be nice to just exist and let someone else carry the weight of the world." "Just ran some errands, honey." I would reply smoothly, placing a plate of perfectly seared salmon in front of him. You work so hard for us. I would smile that sweet, submissive smile, knowing damn well that while he was carrying the weight of the world, I had just closed a $50,000 consulting contract and my investment portfolio had yielded more in a week than his annual firm bonus. The thrill of flying completely under the radar gave me a rush like nothing else. Over the next 2 years, my secret empire exploded. Word of mouth in the startup community is a powerful thing. By the end of year one, I hit my first million. By the middle of year two, my firm was managing the financial structuring for over 40 high net worth clients. And all the while, Julian and Victoria continued to treat me like a dim-witted house cat. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, was so convinced of their inherent superiority, that they never once questioned why I had suddenly become so agreeable. They mistook my silence for submission, never realizing it was actually intense, laser-focused concentration. I was officially a multimillionaire. My net worth sat at a staggering $5.2 million. The money was secured, legally untouchable, and hidden behind layers of corporate structuring. I had my exit strategy completely mapped out. I was just waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger, file for divorce, and walk away into my new life. But life has a funny way of throwing gasoline on a fire. I thought I had experienced the worst of Julian. I thought his emotional abuse and financial control were the depths of his cruelty. I was wrong, because right as I was preparing to leave him on my own terms, I stumbled upon a secret of his, a betrayal so deep, so disgustingly cliched, that it changed my entire plan. I didn't just want to leave him anymore. I wanted to completely, publicly, and legally destroy him. There is a specific kind of danger in thinking you have a narcissist figured out. Just when you think you've reached the bottom of their depravity, they hand you a shovel and show you they can dig much, much deeper. By the end of my second year running my secret firm, I was ready to walk away. I had my $5.2 million securely tucked away. I was quietly touring luxury penthouses in Manhattan, preparing to file for divorce, hand Julian his precious prenuptial agreement, and vanish into my new, fabulous life. I was actually going to let him off easy, but then he made the biggest mistake of his life. He overplayed his hand. It was a random Tuesday evening. Julian had texted me that he was swamped with a massive merger and would be sleeping at a hotel downtown near the firm. I was in his home office looking for a stamp in his desk drawer when his backup iPad, which he rarely used and clearly forgot to unsync from his phone, lit up. A text message popped onto the lock screen. An Amanda, junior associate. Room 412. Wearing that La Perla set you bought me. Tell the boring wife you're working late again. My blood went ice cold. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just carefully unlocked the iPad. He still used the same passcode from 4 years ago, completely underestimating my intelligence, and I opened his messages. It wasn't just a physical affair. It was a complete, humiliating double life. I scrolled through months of disgusting texts, hotel receipts, and photos. Amanda was 24, fresh out of law school, and completely obsessed with the lavish lifestyle Julian was providing her. But the detail that made me see red, the detail that shifted my mindset from walking away to scorched earth, I found a picture of Amanda posing on a yacht, wearing a stunning custom $30,000 diamond tennis bracelet. It was the exact same bracelet Julian had bought me for our first anniversary, which he later claimed had been stolen by the cleaning lady. He had fired the poor woman, threatened her with police action, and gaslighted me into thinking I had carelessly left the door unlocked, all so he could regift my diamonds to his mistress. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Right then, the plan changed. I didn't just want to leave him. I wanted to publicly, legally, and financially annihilate him. I immediately lawyered up. I didn't hire a family friend. I hired Rebecca Sterling, no relation to Julian, ironically. Rebecca was known in the Boston legal scene as the Black Widow. She was the most ruthless, terrifying, and brilliant divorce attorney in the state. She charged $1,000 an hour, and she was worth every single penny. I walked into her office, dropped a massive binder of my financial statements, the signed prenup, and a USB drive containing every single text, photo, and offshore bank transfer I had quietly extracted from Julian's iPad. Rebecca adjusted her glasses, flipped through my $5.2 million net worth portfolio, read the terms of the prenup, and then looked at the evidence of his affair. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face. "Emma," she said, leaning back in her leather chair, "your husband is an absolute idiot. We are going to slaughter him. but we have to let him throw the first punch. So, I went back to the house and executed the most flawless gray rock performance of my life. For 3 excruciating months, I acted like the perfect, oblivious, brain-dead Stepford wife. I ironed his shirts. I smiled while Victoria told me I looked tired and aged. I kissed his cheek when he came home smelling like Amanda's cheap vanilla perfume. I gave him absolutely zero emotional reaction, zero suspicion. I made him feel so incredibly comfortable, so arrogant, and so completely in control that he decided it was time to discard me. It happened on a Friday night. Julian walked into the kitchen, threw a thick manila envelope onto the marble island, and crossed his arms. "I'm filing for divorce, Emma," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm sorry, but you've just let yourself go. We have nothing in common. I need a woman who operates on my level, someone who understands ambition. I've outgrown you." He tapped the envelope. "My lawyers drafted this. It's a separation agreement. Because of the prenup, you get nothing. But out of the goodness of my heart, I'm offering you a one-time settlement of $50,000. Consider it severance pay. Take it, pack your bags by Monday, and don't make a scene. If you try to fight this, I will drag this out in court until you can't even afford to buy groceries." $50,000. He was trying to buy my silence with literal pennies while he sat on millions, fully believing I would be grateful for the scraps. To make matters worse, I later found out he and Victoria had started spreading vicious rumors around their country club that I was mentally unstable, addicted to shopping, and that he had to leave me for his own safety. He was trying to destroy my reputation before I even walked out the door. I looked at the $50,000 check. I looked at his smug, punchable face. I forced tears into my eyes. I let my lip tremble. I acted completely shattered, playing the exact role he expected. "Julian, please. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. How can you do this?" "It's just business, Emma," he smirked, turning on his heel and walking out the door to go meet Amanda. "Sign the papers. You can keep the Honda." He thought he had destroyed me. He thought he had played the ultimate chess move and checkmated his helpless wife. He had no idea that my attorney, Rebecca, was already drafting a financial subpoena that would legally freeze his secret offshore accounts. He had no idea that his entire firm, his mother, and his precious mistress were about to have front-row seats to his execution. The stage was set for the courtroom, and I was ready to drop the bomb. The air in the Suffolk County Courthouse was thick and smelled like old wood, floor wax, and desperation. But as I walked through those heavy double doors with my attorney, Rebecca, I had never breathed easier in my entire life. I was wearing a sharp-tailored, blood-red blazer. I figured if I was going to a slaughter, I might as well dress the part. Julian was already sitting at the petitioner's table. He looked like a walking Brooks Brothers billboard, whispering and laughing with his overpriced lawyer, a slimy-looking guy named Vance. And to make the setup absolutely perfect, sitting right there in the front row of the gallery was Victoria. She was clutching her pearls, practically glowing with the anticipation of watching her peasant daughter-in-law get tossed into the gutter. When the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Harkness, called our case, Julian stood up, buttoned his jacket, and gave me a look of pure, yet unadulterated pity. Vance, his lawyer, cleared his throat and started the show. "Your Honor," Vance began, using that fake, soothing voice lawyers use when they think they have an easy win. "This is a very straightforward, uncontested separation. My client, Mr. Sterling, is the sole breadwinner. The respondent, Emma, has been unemployed for the duration of the marriage. We have an ironclad prenuptial agreement, but out of the sheer generosity of his heart, my client is offering a $50,000 lump sum settlement to help her transition into, well, whatever her new reality might be." Julian smirked. Victoria actually let out an audible sigh of relief from the gallery. They thought it was over. Judge Harkness looked over her glasses at us. "Counselor, does your client accept this settlement?" Rebecca stood up slowly. She didn't rush. She adjusted her glasses, picked up a massive 5-inch thick binder from our table, and dropped it with a loud thud that echoed through the silent courtroom. "No, Your Honor, we absolutely do not accept," Rebecca said, her voice ringing out cold and sharp as a scalpel. "In fact, before we even discuss my client's situation, we need to address the blatant perjury currently sitting at the petitioner's table." Julian's smirk faltered. Vance looked confused. "Objection, Your Honor. What is this?" "This," Rebecca said, holding up a flash drive, "is a complete forensic paper trail proving that Mr. Sterling has been illegally funneling marital funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands for the past 14 months to hide them from this court. Furthermore, it contains receipts proving he used those hidden funds to purchase over $80,000 in luxury goods, including a $30,000 custom diamond bracelet, for his 24-year-old paralegal, Amanda Collins. The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Julian's face drained of all color. He went from looking like a cocky GQ model to a deer staring down the headlights of an 18-wheeler. He whipped his head around to glare at Vance, but Vance looked just as shocked. Julian had lied to his own lawyer, a classic textbook narcissist move. Victoria gasped from the gallery, clutching her chest like she was about to go into cardiac arrest. "Is this true, Mr. Vance?" Judge Harkness barked, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Vance was sweating bullets. Your Honor, I have no knowledge of these accounts." "Well, you do now," Rebecca interrupted smoothly, handing a copy of the binder to the bailiff. "But, Your Honor, the infidelity and the financial fraud are just the appetizers. We are here to finalize the division of assets according to the prenuptial agreement Mr. Sterling's family so graciously drafted." Rebecca turned to me, giving me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The moment had arrived. "Mr. Vance stated that my client is unemployed and indigent," Rebecca continued, her voice rising so everyone in the room could hear. "I would like to direct the court's attention to page 4 of my client's financial disclosure, which we filed under seal yesterday." The judge flipped open my folder. Her eyes scanned the page. She stopped. She frowned, took off her reading glasses, wiped them, put them back on, and read it again. "Counselor," Judge Harkness said, looking directly at me with a mix of shock and immense respect, "are these numbers accurate?" "Fully audited and certified by an independent third party, Your Honor." Rebecca smiled. Very well," the judge said, clearing her throat. She looked right at Julian, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "For the record, the respondent, Emma Sterling, is the sole founder and CEO of Apex Financial Consulting, LLC. Her business valuation, liquid assets, and real estate portfolio bring her total net worth to exactly $5.2 million. If a bomb had gone off in the courtroom, it would have been less impactful. Julian physically stumbled backward, knocking his chair over. "What?" he screamed, completely losing his polished aristocratic composure. "$5 million? From where? She doesn't do anything. She's a housewife. She's lying. This is a scam." "Order!" The judge slammed her gavel. "She built an empire from the guest house of your own estate, Mr. Sterling," Rebecca said, leaning on the table, enjoying every single second of his meltdown. "While you were busy playing golf and playing house with your junior associate, Emma was securing multi-million-dollar contracts." I watched Julian's brain short-circuit. The math was violently hitting him. The woman he had relentlessly bullied, gaslit, and treated like a brainless maid was actually wealthier than he was. But then, the greed kicked in. His toxic, entitled brain found a lifeline. "Wait!" Julian yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Wait a minute. She built that business while we were married. I paid the mortgage. I put food on the table. Under Massachusetts state law, that makes it a marital asset. I am entitled to half. I want half of her company." Victoria stood up in the gallery, her voice shrill. "He's right. She used our house. Half of it belongs to the Sterlings." Judge Harkness looked like she was ready to hold them both in contempt. But before she could even raise her gavel, Rebecca let out a low, dark chuckle. She picked up a single piece of paper from our desk. "Oh, Julian," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with the exact same condescension he had used on me for years. "Did you forget the most important rule of the game you forced my client to play?" Rebecca held up the prenuptial agreement. Section 4. Paragraph 15. Drafted by your own mother, signed in your own law firm. I quote, "Any and all assets, businesses, or wealth generated by either party during the duration of the marriage shall remain the sole and exclusive property of the individual who generated them. Neither party shall be entitled to alimony, equity, or a division of the other's independently acquired assets." Rebecca lowered the paper and looked Julian dead in the eyes. "What's hers remains hers. You get absolutely nothing. Zero. Zilch. Not a single red cent of her $5.2 million. The silence that followed was absolute perfection. It was the sound of a narcissist's entire universe collapsing in on itself. Julian's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. He looked at the prenup. He looked at his lawyer, who had completely buried his face in his hands. He looked at his mother, who had sunk back into her chair, looking 10 years older and completely, utterly defeated. And then he looked at me. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't look at me with pity or disgust. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. I just smiled, adjusted the collar of my red blazer, and gave him a tiny, mocking wave. Checkmate. The fallout from that single courtroom hearing was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, and I enjoyed every single second of it. Judge Harkness didn't just deny Julian's ridiculous demand for half my company, she practically nailed him to the wall. Hiding marital assets in offshore accounts and lying about it under oath isn't just a sneaky divorce tactic in Massachusetts, it's perjury. It's a felony. The judge froze all of Julian's remaining assets on the spot. Because he had illegally funneled over $200,000 of marital funds to his little mistress, the judge ordered that not only did he have to pay it all back, but he was also completely responsible for covering 100% of my attorney fees. And let me tell you, Rebecca, the Black Widow Sterling, did not come cheap. The divorce was finalized a month later, and I walked away with every single penny of my $5.2 million empire, cleanly protected by the very prenuptial agreement his mother had shoved down my throat 5 years prior. But the legal beating was only the beginning of Julian's complete and utter destruction. Word travels fast in the Boston legal community. When the partners at Julian's prestigious law firm caught wind that he had committed financial fraud, committed perjury, and had been sleeping with a junior paralegal, they didn't just fire him, they publicly threw him under the bus. They reported his unethical conduct to the Massachusetts Bar Association. Last I heard, his law license had been suspended indefinitely, and he was facing a massive ethics probe. Without his six-figure salary and with his bank accounts drained by the divorce settlement and legal penalties, Julian couldn't afford the mortgage on the $4 million colonial mansion. He was forced to sell it at a loss just to stay afloat. And Amanda? The 24-year-old mistress who loved La Perla lingerie and stolen diamond bracelets? The second she realized Julian's trust fund was locked up and his career was essentially dead, she dropped him like a bad habit. Rumor has it she's now dating a 60-year-old hedge fund manager in Connecticut. So much for true love. But perhaps the most satisfying downfall belonged to my former mother-in-law, Victoria. Victoria's entire existence was built on social currency. She lived for her country club status, her charity galas, and looking down on everyone else. But high society is vicious. When the scandal of her son's public humiliation and financial ruin leaked to the other HOA board members, she became an absolute pariah. The same women she used to sip mimosas with started entirely icing her out. She was quietly asked to step down from the charity board to avoid bringing negative press to the organization. She now lives in a much smaller, incredibly average condo in a suburb she used to make fun of, completely isolated and drowning in her own bitter reality. Julian actually had the sheer audacity to call me one last time, about 2 months after the divorce was finalized. I was sitting on the balcony of my brand new $3.5 million penthouse in Tribeca, New York, watching the sunset over the Manhattan skyline. I answered the phone, just out of pure curiosity. "Emma, please," he begged, his voice cracking. He sounded exhausted, broken, and pathetic. "I lost everything. The firm, the house, my license. I made a mistake. You have to help me. You have millions, Emma. Can't you just loan me enough to cover my legal fees? For old time's sake?" I took a slow sip of my vintage champagne, letting the silence stretch out, making him sweat. "Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, "let's be realistic for a second. What exactly do you contribute to my life? You're a financial black hole. You bring absolutely zero value to my world." I used his exact words from that Christmas Eve, the words that had broken my heart and started my empire. I heard him gasp on the other end of the line. "Emma, that's not fair." "Section 4, paragraph 15, Julian," I whispered. "What's mine is mine. Good luck." And I hung up. I blocked his number, deleted his contact, and permanently erased Julian Sterling from my universe. Today, my life is unrecognizable from the girl who used to cry in the guest bathroom because her mother-in-law insulted her cooking. Apex Financial Consulting, LLC, has doubled in size. We recently crossed the $10 million valuation mark. I moved my headquarters to New York City, surrounded by a team of brilliant, fiercely independent women. But my proudest achievement isn't the penthouse, the designer clothes I now buy for myself, or the millions in the bank. It's the nonprofit foundation I started last year. We provide free, aggressive legal representation and financial planning for women who are trapped in financially abusive marriages. We help them find the exit door that their toxic partners tried to nail shut. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: never let a narcissist dictate your worth. Financial abuse is one of the quietest, most insidious forms of control. They will try to convince you that you are incapable, unintelligent, and completely dependent on them. They will build a cage, paint it gold, and call it love. But you are the one holding the key. Your value is not determined by an arrogant partner, toxic in-laws, or a bank account they control. If they try to bury you, remember that you are a seed. Grow in the dark. Build your exit strategy in silence. Let them think they are the smartest person in the room. Right up until the moment you legally and systematically dismantle their entire world. Always keep your receipts, always know your numbers, and never ever sign a prenup without your own damn lawyer. Thank you so much for watching. If my story resonated with you, or if you just absolutely loved watching Julian and Victoria get the karma they so richly deserved, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and tell me, how would you have handled Julian in that courtroom? Until next time, stay strong, know your worth, and keep leveling up.